This video will cover cellular respiration in a little bit more detail. We'll start with an overview, which is just saying that cellular respiration is going to occur in cells. It's going to occur if it's aerobic cellular respiration in the mitochondria. Cellular respiration is going to be the process that releases energy from food, and it's going to be a controlled process because if you released all the energy at once, it would be kind of like a bonfire, but cellular respiration releases it over a series of steps, and it traps the energy kind of along the way. It's going to make ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell, and we need ATP for everything that we do. We need it for things like sitting and walking. Here, just a few ideas here. Sitting, 28 kilocalories per hour. Fast dancing, 599 kilocalories per hour. So we need ATP to perform big things and then also little cell processes. There are 3 stages in cellular respiration. There's glycolysis, which is going to take place in the cytoplasm of the cell. It's going to capture small amounts of energy in ATP, and it's going to break down glucose into pyruvic acid. If there's oxygen present and aerobic respiration is taking place, then it's going to move to the Krebs cycle, which will be in the mitochondria. The pyruvic acid is going to go through the Krebs cycle and is going to create some ATP and then some energy carriers. It will also release carbon dioxide. The last step of cellular respiration is the electron transport chain. This will occur in the inner membrane of the mitochondria called the cristae. Most of the energy is made here. It takes the products from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle to make a lot of ATP. Whenever we look at cellular respiration, we can look at anaerobic processes and aerobic. Aerobic processes will be pathways of cell respiration requiring oxygen, so this would be the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. Anaerobic will be pathways of cell respiration that do not require oxygen. This will be glycolysis, which doesn't directly need oxygen, but then the final products are key for the aerobic parts of cellular respiration. And then anaerobic respiration will also include fermentation. Glycolysis literally means sugar breaking, and it's going to result in the formation of 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, which are 3 carbon molecules. So it takes 1 molecule of glucose, which has 6 carbons, and it breaks it into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, which is a 3 carbon compound. Glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm, and it's a really fast process. It happens in prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and it does not require the use of oxygen. With glycolysis, we actually need 2 ATP to start the process, and then it will make 4 ATPs, which makes a net of 2 ATP. And so glycolysis takes a little bit to get going, but then it creates 2 ATP. It also creates something called NADH. In photosynthesis, we talked about electron acceptors. In cell respiration, we have NAD+ as the electron acceptor. It's going to accept electrons and become NADH. And then NADH is going to carry energy from glycolysis and carry that to the electron transport chain. The things that are produced in glycolysis, we end up with 2 ATP. Those are going to be used for cell processes. And then we have 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, and these will move into the Krebs cycle. And then we have 2 NADH, which will go to the electron transport chain. If oxygen is available, then pyruvic acid and NADH are going to be used for these other cell processes. If oxygen isn't available, then it'll go through a process called fermentation. For this next bit, we'll assume that we're going to have oxygen present, and so we'll have oxidative respiration. This means basically that it requires oxygen, and respiration is the process that involves oxygen and then breaks down food to release energy. Oxidative respiration includes the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. In the Krebs cycle, we're going to take the 2 molecules of pyruvic acid that were made in glycolysis and then break them down into carbon dioxide. The Krebs cycle takes place in the mitochondrial matrix, which you can see on your screen as that inner part of the mitochondria, and it is going to also be called the citric acid cycle. the goal of the Krebs cycle is to extract energy, and it's going to do this by transferring electrons to short-term energy compounds. So it's going to create from NAD+, it'll make NADH, and then from FAD, it'll make FADH2. These electron carriers are going to be taken to the electron transport chain, which is the next step of oxidative respiration. It is also going to make some ATP. It'll make 2 ATP molecules for each time it goes through the cycle. So each molecule of glucose will cause the citric acid cycle to turn twice, essentially. The byproduct of the Krebs cycle is carbon dioxide. So breaking down pyruvic acid will produce carbon dioxide, ATP, and then these carriers, NADH and FADH2. So the summary of the Krebs cycle is that we have carbon dioxide produced, which is going to be exhaled as waste and then used by plants for photosynthesis. We have ATP produced, which will be used to power cellular activities. And then we have NADH and FADH2, which are moved on to the electron transport chain, where tons of ATP will be made from those. So here's your summary: 2 ATP, 8 NADH, and 2 FADH2. Our next step of the oxidative respiration or aerobic cellular respiration is the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is a series of proteins that is going to essentially transfer the electrons. So it's going to use the products from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, specifically the NADH and the FADH2, and it's going to use those because they are carrying energy from the electrons, and it's going to use those to make a lot of ATP. The electron transport chain will only work if oxygen is present because oxygen is the final acceptor of electrons for the electron transport chain. So if oxygen isn't there, then it gets backlogged essentially, and so the electrons can't continue moving, and so the electron transport chain stops, and then ATP is not being produced as quickly as it should be. The electron transport chain in prokaryotes is going to be located in the cristae of the mitochondria, which is the inner membrane. So in eukaryotes, it's in the cristae of the mitochondria. In prokaryotes, it's going to actually be in the cellular membrane. You can see a summary of that here. So again, eukaryotes, the electron transport chain, or the series of proteins, are on the inner membrane of the mitochondria. In prokaryotes, it will just be in the cell membrane. For the electron transport chain, we can break it into 3 steps. First, we have the electrons from NADH and FADH2. They're released and passed down those series of proteins. The second step is oxygen as the final electron acceptor. It's going to combine with some hydrogen ions, also from NADH and FADH2, and it's then going to form water. Like I said before, without oxygen, the electrons have nowhere to go, and the electron transport chain will stop. The final step of the electron transport chain is the creation of ATP by something called chemiosmosis. This is what's going to happen as hydrogen protons flow through the ATP synthase. The ATP synthase is a protein that is in the membrane of the inner mitochondrial membrane. Chemiosmosis is really important because it's going to be how most of the ATP is made. And so the ATP synthase, as you pass maybe a pair of electrons down the chain, it can make up to 3 ATP. The ATP synthase is over here on the right-hand side, and if you actually see this in a cell model, it kind of looks like a little turbine or like a little windmill, and so it's making ATP, and it's just making it at a really fast rate. At the end of aerobic respiration, so glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain, we get about 38 molecules of ATP per molecule of glucose. This is actually only about 37% of the energy that's in glucose makes it into the ATP. The rest of it's lost as heat. And while that might seem like it's not very much, it's actually pretty efficient. Automobiles are somewhere between 20 and 40%. And then if we look at anaerobic respiration, which we'll look at next, anaerobic respiration only gets about 2% of the energy outside of glucose. So this process, while it might not seem like 37% is very good, is actually pretty efficient and a really good way to get all of that energy out of the glucose and into usable form of energy for our cells, which is ATP.